just felt just this heaviness that I was going to have to confront the ministry on this, and that they were trying to hide it.
So we were in a 4-hour meeting with 22 people. It was the most horrific experience with ministers that I've ever had. And the response was, they're allowing the perpetrator back in because he had the spirit of the Lamb.
This is Dean Brewer. And Dean Brewer, we knew him growing up. He's been in our area. He was like the holiest of holy.
Why didn't we question and use that same thinking process with this? And I think we all have looked at each other and said, we checked that at the door, because this was just to be blind faith. I feel like we're learning the Bible through an entirely new lens.
And I remember driving away from the convention grounds with mom and dad, and mom rolled down the window, and a worker came to say goodbye, and he said, have a good year. And mom said, now that all 3 of them are professing, it's going to be a great year. And so it was a check the box. We've called conformity unity.
Yes.
And
I realized about a year ago that I was living a double life. I grew up, sounds crazy now, but I grew up, you had your professing friend's birthday party, and then you got a second birthday party for your school friends. And
the friends and workers compartmentalize their spiritual life and their natural life.
Yes.
But I've been asking my mom, what is the gospel? What is the gospel? Is it that Jesus came, or that the workers in meeting in the home came? Everyone around us is going to think that we condone that message, and then several people will stand up and say what they appreciated the last meeting in their testimonies, and it goes right into the notebooks as our doctrine. And so I realized the only way to disagree with this doctrine is to actually not support it.
We've heard the building on the sand and building on the rocks, and then you realize we're on the sand, and then we've heard the Pharisees, and when we realize that we are the Pharisees, well, the opportunity for fellowship is everywhere now.
All right. So we've got what should we call you, a panel? Panel of people?
I don't know, we're friends. I don't know, are we a panel?
Can't use that word anymore.
Oh, gosh, it is ruined.
New friends.
New friends.
I've made so many new friends.
But we've been connected for
A long time.
18 months.
So I got an email that said, hey, what about a group interview? And I thought that was a great idea. And I think it's a good idea because people can know that when you leave, you're not alone, or you don't have to be alone. When I left, I was, it wasn't cool. That was before it was cool. So, but now there seems to be a huge amount of support and people you can talk to and stuff like that. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and I think we can speak to that. I think that's something I want to share because, and I'll
first let's go around and say everybody's name.
Okay.
And if you were born and raised, don't forget your thought though. And then how long ago since you left? So.
Sure. Hi, my name is Suzanne Williams, and I was born and raised in the fellowship. And I left in January of this year, 2024.
Okay.
I'm Deanna Cole. I was also born and raised, one of those 4th to 5th generation. I left in June of 2023.
Okay.
Hi, Alisha Barr, and born and raised, I think, 3rd generation, technically. And what was the other question?
How long ago since you left?
Oh, June 7th. So
Of
2
2024.
months. 2024.
Dennis Hammond, born and raised, I think 5th generation on both sides. And we gave up our Sunday morning meeting in June, so just a couple months ago.
Okay. So we're filming this, is it still August? It's August. Okay. So, all right, to your whatever you probably forgot already, but you were going to say something.
Friendships.
Yeah, no, I think we were kind of talking about what ties us all together.
Yeah.
And so I think what's a little unique, Alisha and myself, back when this really went out just after the news of Dean Brewer broke, I think it was maybe a month later, we requested, a couple of us moms got together just concerned. And, I think it was the first time we even ever had a conversation really together about all of this and what was going on, and sat at a friend of ours at her breakfast table. And what came out of that was there was a group of 8 of us moms, I think, was it 8 then? I think at that point, that started having conversations, and at that point had requested a meeting with at that point, I'm going to say he was the overseer, Daryl Dolan. Not quite. He hadn't been appointed. That's
July.
right. So we had requested, and that was kind of before some of those listening meetings. And that group of the 8 of us have been together ever since.
Okay.
And been connected.
So you and Alisha are part of that group?
Correct. And
Okay.
then just recently, in the last couple months, Deanna has joined in, and we've really gone through this entire thing, not only collectively as women, as moms, as wives, but and our spouses have been part of that journey as well. So it's really been kind of a unique situation, because through that process, I think 6 out of the 8 now have left the fellowship. We were all part of it when we started.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it started out as like,
Concerned.
yeah, something's going on here.
Correct.
And is there something we can do about it, or something like that?
Right. And that,
We wanted to fix it.
Yeah.
We thought.
absolutely. So I think
those questions.
yeah, it was all about finding solutions and how to get, and really it was, for us, was digging through and asking the question of what is behind this. Obviously what was being uncovered initially was all about the child sexual assault going on that had been what we were hearing daily, far greater than what we ever even imagined. So that initially, and what that then drove us to, is to start asking the question, why? Why was this happening at the rate, and how? And that's where we then requested a meeting with Daryl, and all of our spouses, eight couples came together and met early last summer.
The meeting was in July.
July,
Beginning of
okay.
July. And we had Daryl as well as 2 other workers present. And we actually had a document of questions, hardcore,
For them?
for them to answer. It lasted probably 4 hours.
Yeah, I mean, it really was,
Full depth.
there was a lot of thought put into it, a lot of input from all of us, and we really, at that point, we're starting to ask not only the questions about safety and concerns of how the abuse was happening, but really starting to ask the hard questions of why do we have a culture of abuse, and just, I mean, everybody was digging in and trying to really get to the bottom, as opposed to knowing. I mean, I think we all know. I mean, the CSA is the worst, the most egregious of all crimes. So I think that's undisputable in my mind. And I'll say that personally as a victim of CSA, not within our church, but I think that. But it just kept begging the bigger question. And so with Daryl, maybe you can share a little bit, where do you think we got with that?
I think Daryl is amazing at being a good speaker and making you feel good. But then when we went back over our list, we realized half our questions weren't answered. So for me, it wasn't confirming. I just had more questions.
So the meeting was meant to clarify the issues, like, and things that maybe they would be doing to correct them.
Yeah, and
Is that right?
we started with the CSA, but we also addressed culture, finances, all of the traditions, appearances.
Mm-hmm.
It got pretty in depth.
And at that point, I mean, I think we were talking a little bit about exclusivity. A lot was culture, but I think we still hadn't dug in, and I think it was still a little bit of time until we had we all started looking at the history, and that's when Cherie Kropp's book, Preserving the Truth. And a lot of us were getting our hands on everything we could possibly to try to understand how we landed where we were, because it was so, it really was, I think we were all just dumbfounded, really, at what we were learning and the level of information that was coming out.
Yeah. So one thing I'm really horrible about is remembering people's names. And I'll blame it for leaving the cult. Like, you don't want to remember things, so you forget everything. I don't know. Deanna, is that right? Okay. So, you left before everybody here then. So what was, obviously it was after this all was exposed, but what was that like? And what was like the main I mean, that's kind of a silly question, but just give us a little bit of details on that.
So our son was in the work for 6 years, and he left in 2022.
Left the work or left?
He left the work.
Okay.
And the fellowship as well, partly because of severe companion abuse. So my husband and I were trying to support him. He came back home, and it was pretty substantial. He was pretty destroyed. And then trying to just kind of support him, but at that time I was still very much in the fellowship.
Did you start to see some?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And about 5 years ago, I started to feel like there was something missing. There was something that wasn't, but I blamed it on myself. I wasn't willing enough. I wasn't, all the things that we say or think. And I visited with different friends about it, and it was just, that's just how it is kind of deal. And then Warren's experience, which is his story to tell. But then when the news broke about Dean, I was a child when he started in the work in Alaska, and that's where I was raised. I had very, very personal memories of things with Dean that were really, really hard to get past. And realizing that I came very, very close to potentially being one of his first victims as a child. And I have a stack of letters that I found a couple months ago that I'm waiting to burn because I just don't know what else to do with them. But that was a lot to process. And then Mark had been such a huge part of our lives because of our son going in the work. He had been in our home a lot. So all of that together. And then we heard that there was some friends of ours down in California were having a meeting after Mountain Ranch Convention last year because they were concerned about what was happening. There was no policy in place for California. So they invited Gary and I to come down because one of the workers that was going to be there was name was being tossed around as a potential overseer here. And I only knew one side of that person who had, the most stellar reputation. But we drove down, and the prayer for Gary and I both as we drove was that we would see what we needed to see. We would see it and accept it, whatever it was. So we were in a 4-hour meeting with 22 people. It was the most horrific experience with ministers that I've ever had.
So who was all at the meeting?
There were
workers and friends, or
there
just
were 6 workers.
Okay.
And then so there were 6 workers plus 22 of the friends.
Okay.
Most of them were elders and their wives in the Sacramento field. And I think all but 2 of those couples have left since that happened. And, trying to ask questions. I had pretty intimate knowledge, if you will, about a certain friend of mine who was a victim in that area. And so I got pretty emotional in the meeting, trying to present her side. And the response was, they're allowing the perpetrator back in because he had the spirit of the lamb. And because, like Susie, I am also a victim of CSA by someone that the workers put in our home for the gospel's sake. And so, yeah, I was in a Sunday morning meeting. We got back from California. I was in a Sunday morning meeting. Things went horribly wrong during that meeting, that Sunday morning meeting. Things were said that I could not tolerate. So I got up and walked out, went out to the car. And that was June 23rd, 2023. And I just haven't been able to go back. And I was talking to my husband this morning about it because he continued until June of this year. And I said it was like a gate came down. I couldn't return. I just couldn't stomach any of it. And at that point, it was mostly about CSA. But as for a lot of people, once you recognize that piece and how prolific it seems to be, it opens up all kinds of doors to what's causing this, what's allowing this. And so the doctrine very quickly becomes a big piece of it too.
For sure. All right, Dennis, it's your turn.
What do you want to know?
Well, tell a little bit of your story. What was the final straw for you? And, I do want to add something that I was thinking of and I just remembered. So in the last week, I've done like 5 interviews or something. And what's consistent about that is people are more upset about how it's being, I would say as equally upset about how it's being handled as the CSA issue itself, in a way, because not only did the CSA stuff and the SA stuff happen, and still does, and unfortunately, I'm sure, but the handling of it is that it still is being swept under the rug, and no real actions have been.
The response to all of this.
Yeah,
I think that's been telling for all of us, and that's probably a big one for yours, where you all ended up.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think the response is everything. You're right.
Okay. Sorry, if I don't say something, I'll forget it. So.
No big deal. So, our approach has been, this is our church. These are our friends. We really actually have a humanitarian crisis on our hands here, actually. Our kids, our brothers and sisters, our moms and dads, our aunts and uncles, our grandpa and grandmas, and in-laws. Because we all wanted our families, everybody's always wanted their kids to marry into a faithful family. And so that's a huge crisis. That's like, there's in-laws that aren't talking. And so I was hoping to try to bring that to the workers' attention before we left, but we weren't able to. But it's a huge crisis, and I think what we were like, I got the letter, the dean letter. I got the dean letter on the way to a Wednesday night gospel meeting.
So I wasn't in, so I didn't get the dean letter. I probably read it, but who was that from, and what did it say?
So where I got it from was, I think Doyle Smith in Oregon they put a letter out.
Just explaining what happened.
Sharing
briefly.
Several weeks after he passed away, they discovered that he wasn't what they thought he was. Right. But this was several months. That letter was written and shared several months after that.
Okay.
And so I got this letter from a friend that's not in the fellowship anymore. And I sat in the meeting. We sat in the front row because we always sit in the front row. because everybody's embarrassed to sit in the front row.
I always had to sit in the front row too.
Yeah. It's like, well, we loved it, so why not be in the front row, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
You get extra points. It's
that's not why we did it. You know what's
okay.
embarrassing was we were in a gospel meeting once, and they had to go take the front row and move it to the back for people
yeah.
to sit, and that was embarrassing.
My
Are you kidding me?
My aunt is in Newark, and I think she would put tape on them sometimes. So, and then as people filled in the front row, they'd pull the layer of tape back for the next row.
Yeah. No, we did not do it for the points. We did it because it's embarrassing to have the front row empty.
Sure.
I mean, if this is church and we're there to support the ministry and hear about Christ, like, why don't you want to be in the front row? So, anyway, I got that letter. I read it. I did not read it to my wife and my family. And I sat catatonic in the front row. I literally didn't move. And it just, this heaviness came on me that they were trying to cover this up. Because it said several weeks after he died, they were aware of it. But why is it several months after?
So this was your very first.
Before the workers knew that, yeah. It was getting spread around. Probably mostly people that don't profess anymore outside the fellowship. But my friend sent it to me. So anyway, I just felt just this heaviness that I was going to have to confront the ministry on this, and that they were trying to hide it and cover it up.
Yeah, because that letter they were actually not wanting that letter to be
I don't know how it got out.
Yeah, that was not intended
Yeah.
for public distribution. I think that's where,
So how did
that, which made it even more all the disturbing, because
Yeah.
you learned that was meant to be kept
Yeah.
completely hushed.
you wonder how many letters don't get leaked?
Yeah. None now.
Yeah. So
Everything gets leaked now.
yeah. So how'd you obviously that had to be a pretty crazy feeling sitting in gospel meeting, knowing this, and your whole world was falling out from under you, huh? Like
No, not really. I did not feel that way at all. I
Okay.
felt like, for whatever reason, I have the ability to talk about this and confront it. And so, and I knew I felt like it was my job to do it. And so, I realized, not my generation, like you hear rumors as you grow up. I was one of those, I didn't know, I was kind of embarrassed when I talked to a worker at convention. I'd be embarrassed, I didn't actually know where they had been, and what field they'd been in, because I wasn't really paying attention. I cared about my Sunday morning and my local friends, and then I went and worked and raised my family.
Sure.
So I wasn't super involved in everything, so, but yeah, just this heaviness that I'm just thinking about everybody in the field, in my meeting, the Seattle field, and who's gonna confront the ministry about this. And I just felt like, well, that elder's not gonna do it. That elder's not gonna do it.
So you were an elder, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
For
so
how
I'm
long?
Something like 20 years.
Yeah.
Maybe just over 20 years. So yeah, but it's just like you hear rumors of this stuff. We've all probably heard little rumors, but it was in Colorado, right? Or some weird obscure thing. This is Dean Brewer. And Dean Brewer, we knew him growing up. He's been in our area. He was like the holiest of holy.
And for those who don't know, we're in Washington, and this is where he was, right? Or Oregon.
He's spent
Oregon.
a lot of time in Washington when we were younger.
Okay.
And then he'd been around Idaho, or Montana, and Oregon. I don't know. I wasn't paying attention.
But this is the epicenter of Dean Brewer. Yeah.
Yeah, right here. Yeah. Yeah, so that's how it started. And I just wanted to confront it. And obviously we got some bad fruit here. Where did the bad fruit come from? I immediately felt like it had to do with doctrine and exclusivity. That I don't know how that all came, but this became really clear to me. So yeah, there's a whole year and a half of story to talk about, but that's how we got involved. The final straw was so many people did so much work just to get us in a safe place where, like, we read the book, A Church Called Tove. Have you heard of that book?
Mm-mm.
You haven't heard the book Church Called Tove? Oh my goodness.
Add it to your list.
Okay.
It's the book.
Okay.
It is this situation. Like, it is the book. And then the next book is Pivot. And it's how to turn a church around.
Okay.
And so we were pretty dedicated to that. And the first.
So you guys went to worldly sources to try to, like, that was okay, huh?
Well, I think all of us at that point were digging into books. Dr. Diane Landberg became a go-to for all of us. Podcasts, articles, books. I mean, we really were digging in at every level. A lot of research. I know certainly with the guidelines. I mean, there were so many resources outside of it, which I know, which is interesting because I think all of us hadn't really delved from a religious standpoint outside of the King James Bible. I mean, really.
Well, and just, I mean, anything spiritual or what would be considered religious writings outside of, like you said, the Bible or worker approved convention notes or whatever would have been wrong to.
I have always done that. I've listened to other ministers. Like I remember being at a convention where the worker said, she was talking about David and Goliath and the slingshot, and she said, I don't know much about slingshots. And I was angry immediately. I'm like, how, you got a smartphone, it's on YouTube, look up slingshots, David and Goliath, and there's like 15 videos that will highlight and educate you on slingshots and how that was absolutely the work of God and God's hand in that. And so I've always gone to other sources to look up and understand the Bible better. I've never really been offended by the King James. I guess I grew up in it, right? And so I've always understood it. It's not been that confusing. And I read NIV once in a while, but I also always went out to outside sources to learn more about the Bible.
That's interesting because that's a big, in general, it's a big no-no.
Yeah, I think that's kind of unique.
Yeah.
So I shouldn't have spoke for collectively because
I keep hearing it's unique, but I'm always just like, well, why not? Like.
Yeah, I mean, I think looking, when we're reading the Bible and there was something we didn't understand, I certainly looked up something on the smartphone for maybe a little more of a definition or something. But I have to say, to actually go and listen to other sermons, I probably have a time or two, but I didn't feel like I felt like I was stepping out of what was appropriate, and I certainly wasn't sharing that.
There was I remember when I was a kid, there was one couple that would do that they didn't go to our meeting, but once in a while if we were visiting or something, like this one lady gave a whole testimony about papyrus and like how it was made and how things were recorded back in the day and stuff, and it was amazing, but it was so, like, I remember that still from, I don't know, a long time ago, 25 years ago. But yeah, it's not very common where people go to other sources.
I think one of my drives to do that is the whole Christian community is losing kids to college, and so they go to college and lose their faith in God. It happens across Christianity, and I think we don't talk enough about. A lot of churches don't talk enough about why. I say this infamously, but it doesn't take a lot of faith to believe in God anymore. If you study DNA and science, it's proving absolutely on a shadow of a doubt. This is created by a higher being, and so since our workers don't talk about that kind of stuff, and I want my kids not to get lost to college. I've always dug into creation thoughts and watched sermons on creation and stuff.
That's really good for you. That's good. I have a question. This is completely random.
Yeah.
Did you guys believe in dinosaurs going to meetings?
100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah?
But what my dad told me, it was faith, and there was a verse in the Bible that says God created history and the earth. So back in the 70s, that was his answer.
I think the other answer that was often given was the dinosaurs' bones were put in the earth to found man.
Yeah. Yeah, that was,
I think that was
actually I have a sibling that still believes that.
Yeah.
And it's hard to wrap my head around it, but I guess.
Yeah.
Just a random question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and it's interesting, Dennis, you talk about some of the education part. I mean, I think that, and maybe this is sort of jumping into a different direction, but I think the education historically, and I know things are changing, but historically education and going to college and seeking higher knowledge has been wildly discouraged. I think that whole piece of really the critical thinking and using and questioning things, there hasn't been a culture where that's been safe or seen as appropriate.
You're never allowed to question. I mean, that's how we were raised.
And I think that's how we got where we are.
Yeah.
Is like I remember we've had these conversations. We say, we all went on, and whether we went to trade school or on to work or into college, we're all intelligent people, have careers. We use our critical thinking. We manage life, our careers, people. Why didn't we question and use that same thinking process with this? And I think we all have looked at each other and said, we checked that at the door, because this was just to be blind faith. And I just see where that I think God wants us to dig in. He wants us to ask the questions. And that's where so much of this, and the culture of, you can intellectualize your way right outside of and find yourself outside of it. You've done and we have those conversations, and I think that was a major contributing factor too to that culture.
Yeah, well, when I was 18, I sorted cherries in the warehouses in Wenatchee, and it's like 16-hour days, and so I'd start debating with the women there about religion. And so that made me really dig. And if you dig into the Bible, you can find everything that we do in our church. Like you can back up every single thing that we do in the Bible. But so that was faith confirming back then for me. But now if you dig to find Jesus, you'll find something completely. It's a whole different Bible. And so what happens at convention and everything else is they're reading verses and telling stories to confirm that we're in the right way. But if you read it to find Jesus, it's a completely different story.
Correct.
Like the confirmation bias.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if I would completely agree with you that you can find everything in the Bible. But there's enough.
It'd be fun to do that.
There's enough twisting of verses that the appearance is there.
Yeah, you can tie it together.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah. That's an interesting subject, because we were given a Bible study, and somebody sent it to me, a deeper one. But we were given a Bible study as teenagers of why we believe what we believe.
Yeah.
And the Bible verses to back it up. And I looked at that, and that was actually part of the reason why I left, because nothing actually meant what they were implying it to mean. So there was definitely a lot of cherry picking and twisting.
Exactly. And out of context, right?
Yep.
But you can go find this thing. Oh, they met in homes.
Yep.
Oh, they call it the truth. Oh, they call it the way. Oh, all that. And you can just, and if you can find that and go, okay, there it is. Check.
Yeah, because there's no more deeper research into it.
Right, but it's been, I think it's been so powerful. I mean, I think through so many of our discussions and dialoguing back, I feel like we're learning the Bible through an entirely new lens. I mean, I've just said it over and over. I feel like I'm starting over, and I will say I don't have all the answers yet, and I'm trying to be open, and that's where I think really, that gets into really feeling the Holy Spirit and allowing that to open up, and the power of that to open up the Bible in a way that we have not, or I should say I really have seen it before. It's exciting, along with all of everything that's been terrifying and sad and tragic and I think the word that resonates the most every time we get into the discussion of exclusivity is it's the linchpin.
Yeah.
I mean, I just can't. When you pull that thread, it starts to unpack and explain every single thing that we have scratched our heads, and we look at, and it's become kind of a thing. Well, we're like, what about this? And then we all look, and we're like, here we are, right back again.
Yeah. Well, and it is, the way to heaven is very exclusive, and the way and the truth have been hijacked by the true way and the truth.
Yeah.
Okay, so a question that has come up over the last while doing interviews is, I've talked to people who actually truly had a relationship with God in meetings, and they sincerely thought that when they professed, they were making a choice to God and not church membership or the group in general. It wasn't the case for me at all. I was born and raised probably third generation, and I just went through the motions. That's just what I did. I never had a relationship prior to leaving. So how was that for you? When you left, did you become born again? Do you feel you were already born again going, and that process, or did you become born again after leaving?
I can start.
Okay.
So I do feel like I had a relationship already. When I made my choice, I wasn't planning on professing that day, and I don't think I was ready to profess. But after I made it, I went back into the dorm and was scared to death. Like, what did I just do? And that was when I felt reassurance from God, and He told me, this is between me and Him. This is not an obligation for giving your testimony. This is not an obligation to the church. This is just between me and you. And I felt completely calm. And then through the years, so I definitely had questions about this fellowship since a teenager. I actually had a group of close friends in high school come up to me. They had gotten together and decided that I was in a cult and that they were going to get me out, and showed me all the history of our church. And so I started deep diving a long time ago, but for me, I call them anchor moments, and anchor moments throughout my life where God has touched me. Sometimes it's in meeting, sometimes it's off by myself somewhere, sometimes it's been at someone else's church. But if I'm going to meeting or wherever I'm going, when I did go, if it was my intention to get close to God, He provided. So I don't think when I left that suddenly I had to reconfirm any choice. It's not like everything in my past is just wrong, but I think He's leading me to something deeper.
So you would look at meetings as more of the reason why you stayed, or you didn't know any better until maybe your friends came, and then of course we know how the brain works, that's no, I'm not in a cult kind of thing, but but more of just the legalistic side of it, that you would have continued in, but your salvation wasn't dependent on that.
Yeah, so I think I was lucky in that I was never forced to do a lot of the traditions. And so growing up, my mom told me when I started middle school, she said, if you feel convicted, wear a skirt, wear a skirt. If God isn't telling you that, wear pants. So I wore pants. So I always stood out. I never really fit in to begin with, but I just told myself, all that stuff doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Some people might feel convicted to live that way. I don't. I didn't realize how it affected me, though, until this last year. I didn't realize the guilt I carried. Never quite fitting in, but also not fitting in with the world, and just always being in this gray area.
The workers would probably have words for you on that, I'm sure. You were lukewarm.
I've had a lot of lectures.
Yeah.
But there's also been a lot of grace, and I'm thankful that my family was not super strict in any of that. My dad didn't grow up professing, and my mom re-professed after she was married. So they were not fully indoctrinated. And so I think that helped. But now I see how being complicit to things also, it made my relationship maybe a little more shallow. I checked the boxes. I went to meetings.
Mm-hmm.
I did have a relationship with God, but I didn't fully trust that God could take care of me if I left.
And maybe I should clarify, it's not that God hasn't, we can look back and definitely see God working in our lives for different moments, like you said, throughout our lives. So it's not that I don't think God was there for me in meetings. It was just, that's what you do. I mean, that's how you're raised, that's your culture, that's just what you do.
Yeah, that wasn't my experience. Like when I was 8 years old, I was sitting in the Wednesday Bible study, just messed around like any 8-year-old kid, and I heard an audible voice, "Dennis, you can profess now." And I remember, we were singing the last hymn, and I remember saying, "What?" And it said, "You can profess now." And I said, "What?" It was gone. So I never told anybody about that, but when they tested the meeting at the Gospel Convention, all of a sudden I'm all shaky and emotional, and I felt very much like I was not right with God after that. And it took me 5 years to get up the courage to profess and yield to that, right? But that's one thing that's kept me this whole time is where I've heard God's voice. This is where He wants me. Other churches don't say profess necessarily, so this is where He wants me. And so to be faithful to that calling, I stayed as long as I could till I couldn't support it anymore.
A professing Christian is fairly widely used, but as far as
We usually accept Jesus,
or born again,
but again, that's in the Bible too, the professing Christian and all that. So.
Okay. You know, it's interesting listening to your experiences, because so born and raised in it, I guess third or fourth generation, haven't really sort of unpacked that piece. And I didn't, it was unquestionable that this was God's one and only true way. Having said that, I would say that I really, that always bugged me as a kid. And growing up on the East Coast, I would say it was even more, the traditions and the legalism was, I would say, even stronger there. So, you know, my experience was, you know, I sort of fought it as long as I could. I remember my in fact, my brother and sisters professing a young age, and I was actually, you know, it actually upset me because I saw it as we were no longer going to be able to, you know, I don't know what it was that we couldn't do then, because we couldn't do anything anyway, so I don't know what it was that we weren't going to be able to do. When I was 14, I remember just getting to the point where I knew that God would hold me accountable. I was no longer a child. And for me, at that point, it was fear-based. And I remember someone asking me years ago, you know, my testimony, and I felt like I had to be honest. And so being honest was, I stood up and I was mad. But I absolutely did not want to go to hell, and I knew that, and I knew that this is what I needed to do to avoid that. So that was my start, and so I feel like it was sort of kicking and screaming from a very early age, and I think that there were so many associations with it. It wasn't about that because God loved me. It was, I'm going to have to do these things in order to not go to hell. And it was that simple, and it was truly out of fear. So I think, you know, I spent the next, 20 years just fighting it, but at the same time recognizing that this was the only way I could do. So I was either going to be willing or not willing. And that would determine, but there was certainly no other option. And I did hit a point, and really I see it as one of those moments, pivotal moments, and I had really just kind of kept a lot of it at bay and avoided. I was going through occasionally. I was going through the motions, but then there was an event that happened, and it shook me, and I really felt like at that point I recommitted to God at a different level, and I had to get rid of so much of the outside form. I just knew I couldn't. There was such cognitive dissonance to look a certain way. I had no convictions about that, and so we didn't raise our kids with a lot of those rules. But now unpacking so much of it and sort of doing that deconstructing process, there was so much that was there, even though I felt like I had skimmed off the part that in my mind didn't matter to God. There was so much more I hadn't even begun to see.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, for me, stepping out in faith this past year has been, for the first time, feeling in an alignment. And so I don't know, I'm torn because I know God has spoken to me, and,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't question that for a moment. But the stepping forward really in faith has been so confirming, because I've never searched more, I've never looked more, I've never had more fellowship, more depth of conversation, and more of a desire to learn. And that's, to me, along with just the heartbreak of it all, it's exciting. It has opened up. I mean, I just think of my conversations with my siblings and everything. I mean, the depth of our conversation, the depth of our conversation amongst us moms. I mean, it's so different, and and it's freeing, and it's beautiful, and I don't know. So I'm still, there's a lot I'm still trying to sort out, but I feel like God is so real right now, and that's confirming.
I think it's super important stepping out in faith, because we know that people say they've lost their faith, right? But
all of you guys have, by the way.
we've actually found faith. It takes
We have found it.
Yeah.
it takes so much faith to go and follow where He's leading you.
Mm-hmm.
It really does, and I will share. My father just passed in January at 93, and I had a couple months with him by his bedside, and he's known and professed all his life. But at the end, when all this came through, he was very cognizant. He was the mind was completely there, and so we would just talk. And I said, "Dad, do you want to read the book Preserving the Truth? It just lays out the history. Do you want to know?" Because I would ask him, and he knew much growing up in Philadelphia. He said, "Yes, I want to see it. I want to read it all." And he poured through that, and it was the last book other than the Bible that he read, and it was probably the gift that I felt like God gave me through my father, was to see him pass. And in the last month or two, he was able to see it all. The peace at which he left. And I asked him, I said, "Dad, do you have any reservations?" He said, "Not a one." And there was just, he had a smile, he had peace, he had contentment, and he had let all of that, the stuff go. It got down to, it was just between him and God, and it was palatable. It was, I mean, it was realer than anything, and it was a gift. So I feel like God worked in that for me, and that was a huge bridge
Yeah,
give me the courage.
Praise God. So one thing I thought of when you were talking was, I guess, like you said, you felt the peer pressure to profess and just kind of this is what's expected. This is the only chance you have to get to heaven, so you got to do this. And I think, like for me, the system did the work, right? So since this is the only way, and I'm in it, that's like, and I'm not promoting a work-based salvation. That sounds kind of, but okay. So this is the only way. We as a family didn't really study the Bible together. I don't know if that's normal or not because we are fed by the workers. So all these things that since we are in the true and only way, and then that, I guess that was good enough because there was still a lot of anxiety and fear that it would never be good enough. But that was the relationship was with the system, not a personal relationship. So I guess that was just a little bit more for me. What about you?
I think I probably have to agree with you in the, I remember I was 9 years old at convention, and my best friend professed. That was when they did both Saturday and Sunday night. So my best friend professed on a Saturday night, and I remember watching her and just being like, oh wow, okay, well that's how it's supposed to be. And then, so I professed the next night. And I remember driving away from the convention grounds with mom and dad, and mom rolled down the window, and a worker came to say goodbye, and he said, have a good year. And mom said, now that all three of them are professing, it's going to be a great year.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a check the box.
Mm-hmm.
And then life experiences happen. CSA happens. And then all of a sudden it puts into a lot of question. For me, it was where was God in the middle of all that? And so I don't know. That's something I've been trying to unpack for the last year.
Mm-hmm.
Is where is my relationship, and what is my relationship, and do I even have one? I know I believe. I know that hasn't changed. If anything, it's gotten stronger. It's been a little overwhelming to me to read like on CCF as people deep dive into studies and stuff. Again, there's that feeling of not being good enough. I'm not there. I'm not in that place of feeling. I'm just kind of numb, honestly.
Yeah.
And not sure how to express that. And I feel like, again, I don't really fit into everybody else's experience. So.
Yeah, well, everybody has a different experience for sure.
And I know that, on a mind level, you know that, but
Mm-hmm.
but you still want to be a part of something.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it was just been a little challenging.
I see it like we were raised, like, church was actually really neat.
Right.
Neat and tidy, right?
Very much so.
And that is not. We're all in a different situation.
Well, that's not
God
what life is.
No,
Life is
but-
messy.
But yeah, I mean, God dealing with different people in different situations. We all have different traumas to come out
Well, and I
of and
think
from and through.
There's that thing about what's the difference between conformity and unity, and I think we've used that. Everybody looks the same. We've exchanged conformity, or we've called conformity unity.
Yes.
And
yes.
so trying to figure out, where is the unity? Who am I in unison with? And last Sunday when we did that get together, it was amazing.
And we didn't all look alike.
Exactly, and I can honestly say for one of the first times in my life to be with a group of people that, like I shared earlier, you could start talking and then you wouldn't have any words anymore, and they understood where you were at.
Sure.
And that was pretty powerful for me.
And we're all in different places.
And we're all at different places in the home. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think just really getting that it's the condition of the heart, and it's the fruit, and all that stuff that we put so much weight on, and judgment on, and shame on, or praise on the outward. to really get settled that God's looking inside.
Mm-hmm.
And, and we've got all those cliches of, well, if the inside right, then, the outside will take care of itself and be right. And now I realize that looks very different. You're right. If the inside is right, the outside is going to reflect that. But that doesn't look like not wearing this or having long hair or whatever. It's so different. But it's a deeper work. It's such a deeper work. And I think that's, the amount of comfort we can take in the form and in showing up. And all of a sudden, when you don't have meetings and everything, it's about how you show up every day to your spouse, to your children, to the mailman, to the checker. It's
your world opens up, doesn't it?
It just does.
Mm-hmm.
It opens up from a spiritual standpoint, and I think that's the other thing is so much of the isolation. We didn't do that in raising our children, but I think there's such a danger, and we certainly did growing up. We were not around other families outside of the fellowship.
Mm-hmm.
We did not do, and I know that's wildly different amongst.
I think that's pretty, at least for me, that's pretty normal.
That was really hard when we moved down here from Alaska, because in Alaska, the friends were your family.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were all rebels and had gone up there and nobody had their family. And then we moved down here, and Gary didn't have family that was professing. He professed up there with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so to move down here and be surrounded by all these people that already had their families, that was really hard, because I was used to the friends being my family, and that wasn't the way it was down here. At least that wasn't my experience.
So, one thing that was asked in our group chat today was, how have you changed this last year, or how has this caused you to change? And one person just said how she's been more honest with herself. She's more honest in everything she does. I realized about a year ago that I was living a double life. I grew up, sounds crazy now, but I grew up, you had your professing friend's birthday party, and then you got a second birthday party for your school friends. And we went through periods of owning a TV, but keeping it in our closet and watching it in the back of the closet. And, workers are coming over, we got to throw a skirt on and wear a bun. And anyway, all of those things, where I thought I was maybe just trying to not cause offense to the friends, so I would follow the form. All of those things were causing me to live a double life. And it was like I'm two people. And now that I've left, my whole goal has been, how do I merge all this? How do I really be honest before God and be like, this is it. This is me. I'm flawed, and I don't know a lot. I don't know my next step. I don't know where I'm going from here. But
by the time this interview goes up, there'll be several before this that talk about that same thing about the friends and workers compartmentalize their spiritual life and their natural life.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that was actually the last thing that my last testimony was. I wonder where that stops and starts. And so God was working in there, and I can see that now. But it's just life. No, it's just life. There's not that division.
No.
But yes, that's true. I know, I won't say who it is, but I know somebody who has two Facebook accounts, one for friends and one for non-friends. Isn't that horrible?
I've thought about doing that.
Yeah, that's...
after this crisis.
But it's just crazy how you live a double life in a lot of ways. So there's people behind me. If they have something to say too, that's fine. They just aren't on camera.
There's a little thought that popped into my head. I don't know if you've heard the term shelving. Someone told me about it last summer, and I think it's used in Mormonism a lot. And it's where you take on these legalistic ideas, and if something doesn't quite align, then you put it on a shelf for later. And so a friend was telling me growing up, you know, the traditions and the different checking boxes, she just put it on a shelf. And she told me a year ago, she said, someday that shelf is going to break. It's going to get too heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I'm going to keep shelving. It's okay. I can push through this. But one big pivot for me, even though I stayed in meetings for much, much longer, was as I think I was 19 years old, and my brother came out and was homosexual. And one of the workers that I was super close to told him, well, first pray the gay away and go into the work. That's your options. And the way I felt and the way I treated him with a lot of silence. I realized there was something there that didn't align, because suddenly I'm not showing the love of Christ to this person, because I've been told that he doesn't count when it shows who you love and how you treat them. So that, I think that's when I started my shelving process of something not aligning, but just put it on the shelf and it's okay, just continue forward. So that for me was, this year was suddenly that shelf just could not hold one more thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally relate. I think there was just a lot of cognitive dissonances that just kept, I couldn't match it. But when you believe that this really is the only way, and again, I'll speak for myself, I did believe that this was the only way I could get to heaven. So I needed to find a way to make it work. And that's, so that one for me was taking the really egregious stuff, some of the, the dress and the hair and all that, and just, I settled that wasn't part of it. But there were still so many things that would come up, and I just couldn't reconcile it. But again, you go, this is the only way. So mm-hmm. I lived with that. And I think that has been one of the most freeing in terms of that, is to feel in alignment, not have all the answers, not know maybe what the next steps are, but feeling like you're finally living a more authentic life mm-hmm. before God.
Mm-hmm. And you guys, you all are fresh out. It takes time. I don't have it all together still, and it's been over a decade for me. So, and then you add the level of things that have come out over the last couple of years, and just makes it that much harder.
Yeah, I think of just the betrayal, the deceit. It's just the facts no longer. The facts don't lie. And we've seen people try to, minimize the damage and the abuse. And, something again was shared with me that it was mentioned, well, it's not as bad as people make it out to be.
It's worse.
It's the magnitude is beyond what I think we are as humans able to comprehend. And mm-hmm. then all it comes out, well, there's problems in all the churches. Well, if you get down to plain numbers, if we just look at the abuse, which is just so hard to get past, it's so far beyond the norm, if you could even use that word, which I find so, offensive to even be able to say that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, other churches, they have a structure in place with written policies. Mm-hmm. So once stuff starts coming out, there's accountability. And here we are 18 months later, and there's still no action. There's no accountability.
Right. I remember we all looked at a documentary. It was a church, and I'm not going to be able to remember the name of it. Every time it escapes me. But they recognized collectively as a church, and I think there was a couple 100,000 followers, that when the leader passed, they all looked at the doctrine and found, and they were Sabbatarians at the time, and they found that it was absolutely wrong doctrinally, and they collectively made a decision to turn, to own it, to be held accountable. They lost, I think, 60 or 70% of their following, but they knew they had to do what's right over what was comfortable or what would maintain. And I remember we all reading that, and we're like, this is what needs to happen, and still believing it could. Mm-hmm. And they did. They had a university that shut down. They lost their people, but they did it because they knew they had to be right before God, before anything else. And it just felt like, I remember just feeling like a sense of hope, like, okay, we can get there. But when you realize that we're defending exclusivity and the living witness doctrine, that it must come through our ministers and the power that we've put and given them the pedestals, and we've and helped them climb it. It slowly dawns, or it did on me, that day wasn't coming.
But the beauty about it is you can leave. Now that doesn't change the fact that there's so many inside that.
Brothers, sisters,
yes,
aunts, uncles,
family.
Absolutely.
It's extremely hard. I mean, I think all of us probably have family that still is in. But eventually, I say this, but I have some family that is so super, what do they call it? Super professors or something. They're so in that it's hard to imagine them ever seeing anything else. But if enough people leave, they're forced to come to question. They have to.
Not with exclusivity. Here's the problem with exclusivity is, like, what you think about all the people that have left, right? And,
mm-hmm.
and those that were elders were anointed or given or trusted by the workers for 20 years to have meaning in their home, right? And so if you don't have exclusivity glasses on, you would say, wait a second, what's wrong? All these people that we have trusted and have been secure with are upset. What's wrong? Well, with exclusivity glasses on, it's actually faith confirming. It mm-hmm. says, wow. It says in the end times there'll be a great falling away. Mm-hmm. So.
Well, yeah, that definitely emboldens this. That emboldens the.
It's closer than we thought,
yes.
and we have to hold on tighter than ever.
Yep.
And so that's what exclusivity is so toxic.
Well, the exclusivity, and then you sort of couple it, and it all feeds into itself, the living witness doctrine. So then there's so much focus on helping getting the perpetrators of these egregious crimes into meetings, because the belief is they must be there in order to be saved. Mm-hmm. So we must do everything within their powers to do that, and that again is just it's just heart-wrenching to see the amount of effort that continues right up to last week of looking for volunteers again. Yet the victims, lay in the ditch, but that's okay, because they're not choosing to come to meeting now, and therefore we're not responsible for their salvation because they're not choosing it, and they're bitter, and they're and all that mm-hmm. whole narrative. So it's a loop there that to me is so dangerous, that you now have feeding into this concept that one, regardless of what they have done and the crimes they've committed, we've got to get them in there, because that they cannot have a direct relationship with God. And I think we heard that again from one of our workers at the convention last week, that it must come through. We can't go through directly. If we think we want to go through Jesus, we're mistaken. It must go through the preach. We must go through and hear it from. And that's just wow.
It's wow.
Wow.
It's wow.
Well, and I think what you mentioned about how that proves their point that this is the true and only way or whatever. I think if the FBI, and I think they will, it may take a long time, I don't know, which is sad, but if they come down, what I think will happen is they'll come down on them hard enough to where there won't be able to be conventions and gospel meetings and stuff. But then the select few, the elect, will go kind of underground in these like Sunday meetings, maybe Wednesday night meetings. But that will just be like, oh man, so they'll double down because it will be proof that this is the only way, and all these people are fallen away.
Yeah, I actually heard that after one of our Bible studies. Someone in our meeting, she was upset about a gospel hall getting closed due to
The persecution, yeah.
Yeah, someone tipped off the landlord, and she said, "They're not going to stop us. We'll just open up someone's home and we'll have gospel meetings in their home." And it was just like, in my mind, it was just a big red flag. Like, you're not even looking at why these places are closing down.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, we have to continue on. We have to, do what we've always done. It can't look different.
Just to get to meeting.
And I know Mom and I were talking about it. Mom came to me when she was 19, and she remembers when she was 7 years old and asking God for guidance to find his way. And so it was very confirming for her when she, at 19, discovered the fellowship. And so now when I talk to her, she's like, well, I made a vow to God that I would continue no matter what until I died. But trying to help her understand that continuing to serve God isn't necessarily one and the same as staying in the fellowship. But they can't separate. It's just not.
But that's what they profess to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Exactly. And so.
That's the whole thing that, I think we all have stories, legitimate. They're not just stories. They're real, life-changing events that the gospel came to our families. Right? We've all heard those stories, and I think they're true. I don't think they're made up. And so I have wondered what was going on there that happened. But I've been asking my mom, what is the gospel? But what is the gospel? Is it that Jesus came, or that the workers in meeting in the home came? And that's what they accepted back in the day.
Well, and one of the things the other day when I was talking to Mom in that same conversation, I asked her, I said, what did Jesus come for? Why did Jesus come to earth?
To establish a ministry.
To establish a ministry and to give us an example.
I believe that. I remember being upset with a person arguing, because I've been on the other side 100%. And I said, what did Christ do? The only thing he did was he died on the cross and he established a ministry. That's all he did.
And he left an example.
Yeah.
But an example of what? And she couldn't answer. And that, to me, is really, really sad. After 50 years or more professing.
And I think
that's what they see as,
yeah. I have sensed, I professed through. Now feels so.
It makes
not to say that.
It just everything about that feels.
Well, it makes sense with the living witness doctrine if you think about it, because they beget you spiritual life or whatever.
Yes,
the father in the gospel is, or the mother in the gospel is the term that's often used by Mom's generation.
So I think, and I got to be careful to say this, but I think originally or early on, I think it was since the workers were sincere in actually sharing the true gospel.
Yeah, and when you say very early on, I would agree.
Yeah, because
I feel it's a sincere thing.
like
Absolutely.
In Cherie's book, she talks about how essentially they would share the gospel and then go find a church,
with the
right?
And many in the faith mission.
Yeah, so converting, sharing the gospel, and then go get plugged into your local church.
Exactly. So they were just pointing people to Christ, what feels pure, it feels beautiful, it feels right. And then in came this other stuff. In came the exclusivity. In came the living witness doctrine. In came, pulling these verses out. And, soon we had, we have no founder. We do. He just doesn't get mentioned. And then we learned that there was a conscious decision to not use his name and to just choose the narrative that it's back. We can follow the remnant straight back to Christ.
It mirrors all of humanity if you think about it, right? In the beginning, the garden was perfect, and then sin came in. And so, in a sense, I'm not saying that it was perfect in the beginning of William Irvine's day, but because that's not the case. But it mirrors that, where the farther we get from the beginning, the worse it gets. And so, and we're seeing that in meetings too.
Yeah, and I think when so much of it is passed through the preaching, and so we're translating and seeing the Bible through the words of the workers and the ministers, as opposed to reading the scripture for what it says and then looking for what's spoken to confirm that. We went the other direction. And and then when you take the spoonful, I think it's just been so interesting as I've learned about relationships and abuse in them, is when you take myths, truths, and you add them with a truth, and then you deliver that together, you take the whole spoonful and you accept it all together, because there's part of that is right. And I think that's where it's the slow boil of not recognizing, sort of the frog in the pot, because there is stuff to this day that is being spoken from the platform that I believe is right and is scriptural. But it's almost impossible to untangle.
You asked what was the final straw for me, and the final straw for me was that I heard blatant false doctrine spoke from a platform. I talked to ministers that agreed with me it was false. And I says, but you're not going to go into the convention house and address it. You're not going to come back to the platform next meeting.
Ministers, as in you talk to workers?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're not going to come back to the next meeting and say that was false doctrine. We don't believe that. If I stand up and say, hey, that was false what we heard last meeting, I'm going to be looked on as crazier than I already have become. And I wasn't crazy a year ago. And so then we're all going to sit there on our hands. Everyone around us is going to think that we condone that message. And then several people will stand up and say what they appreciated the last meeting in their testimonies, and it goes right into the notebooks as our doctrine. And so I realized the only way to disagree with this doctrine is to actually not support it with your physical being. And so that's when I told several ministers, the only way to disagree with this church is to quit. And we all know that's false. There's several ministers that know that's false doctrine being preached. So that's why we left. It's like, you can't use my name, you can't use my meeting, you can't use my house, you can't count my numbers in the gospel meeting or at convention. Like, I don't support you. I love you dearly. And I love what we're up to. I've always said that. I've loved our fellowship. There's actually there's very little wrong with what we do. Like, the ministry's there's some issues there. But as far as meeting in the home and there's so much of what we do is okay. It's about what we've come to believe about it that is super toxic.
Well, yeah, it's not inherently wrong to do many of the things they do. Right. As long as the foundation was on Christ and it's not on Christ.
Right. And it could have been, we could have repented. Like, Nineveh was off track, right? And they repented the whole, from the mayor or whatever, governor, all the way down. And so that's what I was appealing to the ministry. I talked to several overseers, like, we're off course. Like, and it's not even offensive to be off course, really. We all get off course.
Absolutely.
Every adventure, every trip we take gets off course. And what you do is you stop, you get out your map, you figure out where you're at, And you're so glad, on the way back to on course, you were so glad you stopped and got your map out.
Well, I don't know if you know this or not, but if you just listen to your wife, you'll never get off course.
Yes.
Amen.
Yeah. Wow.
But here's the thing, we talk about the foundation. There have been so many of us in the last year who were still going, and we kept saying we wanted to help fix it from the inside.
Yeah.
That was our goal.
Yes.
We're gonna work from the
Absolutely.
inside and fix it. But what I told a friend this week, it's like putting new wine into old wineskins. This foundation is not correct. So what are we? We're either inside trying to build a whole new church, which how? Or we're trying to fix something where the more you fix it, the more you realize the foundation is not built on.
And we've heard the building on the sand and building on the rocks, and then you realize we're on the sand, and then we've heard the Pharisees, and we realize that we are the Pharisees, you know. So all of these stories we've heard, we're on the wrong side of.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And Jesus didn't actually win against the Pharisees, actually. They did not accept his message, and they killed him, and they still exist today. And so that was partly what I saw too, is like this battle, they crucified Jesus over it. Like, he brought that same message. Like, there was a perfect way once, and it didn't work very well, right? And so Jesus came to stop that and say, I am the way. And they killed him. And so, what are we doing here?
What are we trying to fix? Yeah.
Yeah, and I've never really cared about William. I've heard all the stories. It's like, I don't care. It's what about us here today, right? I thought we could repent. I thought many were more spiritually led than I've come to understand that they are. And I thought we could repent and get on track. Wouldn't that be a cool story?
Yeah, it would. And I think that's when we read that one story or saw the documentary, it was beautiful, and it was hard.
Like, this is what we're trying to do right here.
It was crushing.
They did it.
They started with the top down though.
They did.
Well, they had 3 leaders that got together and agreed.
And they repented, and
the guts to say it.
Yeah, it was humbling. It was hard. I mean, but it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
You know, I just, you know, and you go back to, I just keep going back. Going back to Christ and the foundation. And I keep thinking of what, on some of the roundtables that started. And I just love all the discussions that have come out of this, that were, one of them in the roundtables, he says, you know, the gospel, it's colossal good news. It's like, have we ever got how amazing it is? And that's the part that I'm starting to try to learn and understand, and then find the joy. And I will tell you, I have some very good friends that have known me 30 years plus, never been part of this fellowship. And now that I have stepped out or stepped forward, they've shared some things. And one of the first things was, and they always wanted to be respectful, and I appreciate that, but they said, where I just never felt the joy. And they've been to meetings, and they've been to conventions, and I've shared with them. And I said, I just never felt the true joy. And that's where we're going back to trying to, we barely miss the mark. We're trying, and we're falling short every time, and we're flogging ourselves for it, when Christ died for us. And I'm not there yet. I'm still trying to grasp all this and then live in that space of gratitude from that, of pure worship. And I'm even trying to understand that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't.
I want to read a passage in Acts because this fits with exactly what we're talking about. So it says, and Peter, filled with the Holy Spirit, said to them, rulers and elders of the people, if we are being examined today about a kind service to a man who was lame, to determine how he was healed, then let this be known to all of you, people of Israel. It is by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom you crucified, but whom God raised up from the dead, and this man stands before you healed. This is the stone you builders have rejected, which has become the cornerstone. Salvation exists in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given to men which we must be saved. And that's what that's what we did, isn't it? We rejected the ultimate, the cornerstone, and we replaced it with a system that can't save you.
I had a visit the other night with a couple that still are very much in, and I asked that question of them about what does the grace of God mean to you? And the lady was like, I don't like that term because that's just a free pass. That just means you can do whatever you want and then, repent in the end and have, because we listened to that little by Alistair Briggs, The Man on the Middle Cross. That's so powerful. It's just, and just because the man on the middle cross said I could come. And but her interpretation of that was, well, that's just a free pass.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point it was like, okay, well, we're on completely different pages here. There's
a quote by Alistair I'll read to you. I just got to pull it up. Hold on. Which is on that same
recording or the...
Well, I don't know if it was from that sermon, but it could be. Hold on a second. Okay, he says, when we don't understand what it means to be united with Christ, then all we'll be left with is either legalism on one hand or lawlessness on the other hand. And so the legalistic people jump to the lawlessness right away. Oh, well, you're just saved by grace? Well, then you can just go do whatever. And but that's not, you just don't understand the power of Christ at that point.
Yeah, and his love. Like, I love the analogy of the stereotypical wife at home making dinner. Does she make dinner? Does my wife make dinner for our family in hopes that someday I will marry her? Or does she do it because I've already accepted her as my wife, I've committed myself to her, and now out of love, she makes dinner for our family?
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, what we're all trying to hope someday. I remember I was lucky to have a worker friend, who's no longer in the work, but he called me one day, and he says, Dennis, are you saved? And I go, he says, you took too long.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that was 20 years ago. But so I felt like that was a real privilege to have a friend address that with me directly.
But what confidence when you can feel that right off the bat, not because you've done and checked all the boxes and gotten to all of it, but just because you understand the love and the sacrifice and the grace that is there.
Yeah.
And I think that's that level of confidence. That's where the joy and that's where just a living in contentment. And I mean the shackles that come off with that,
Amen,
to me are just huge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Huge.
Yeah, you think about the marriage, like what we're just hearing about. Like, so when the marriage, now that you're married, you don't go wild, right? You now things are out of love.
Mm-hmm.
Now I know people will say, but we're the bridegroom, we're supposed to be preparing ourselves, right? And so I'm not prepared to address that exact. Like, I could hear workers saying, we're the bridegroom is supposed to be preparing for the wedding feast, right? But
how do you think we prepare for his return?
Just by loving one another.
We share the gospel
and love each other.
That's how we're preparing.
Yeah.
That's what we're.
Yeah.
I think it's wildly simpler than we've ever imagined.
It is.
And harder, maybe. And I mean that by it's a much deeper, not a shallow, get things done, show up kind of service. And so maybe harder isn't the right word.
There's a level of commitment that is just completely different.
It just is.
When it's an outwardly thing, that's easy to do. When it's an inwardly thing, it takes surgery.
Yeah.
When you talk about sharing the gospel, I felt like in the past, I was more secretive and ashamed
Mm-hmm.
because if I shared my faith with someone, I also felt, I don't know why I felt obligated, but I felt like I needed to explain
Mm-hmm.
the forum. I needed to explain the ministry. I needed to explain why we have meetings in the home. And I knew I'd be looked at as weird. So I didn't want to go there. So I just hid from that.
Mhm.
Now I feel like I can openly talk about my beliefs and my faith, and I'm not ashamed. It's lovely.
Mhm.
We're told to love one another. So how do we prove that to each other? We share the gospel. We share Christ. And it's simple.
Well, the opportunity for fellowship is everywhere now. It just
Yes.
it opens the door wide open.
It's amazing to think that the wall to fellowship was in our hearts, not theirs. We always thought that they weren't willing, but
Mm-hmm.
when you open yourselves up, all of a sudden there's more spiritual conversation all over the place.
Yeah, that's the Pharisee nature that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When we feel like it's our responsibility to save them by bringing them to meeting, it puts a huge barrier between us and them, and then the ability to see or feel or whatever their faith and acknowledge their relationship with God. Yeah, it's been huge.
We thought this was the narrow way. It just came clear as a bell to me a year ago was the way is actually narrower than we thought. It's just Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's our human nature to add stuff to that, right?
It is.
To add all the rules and things. And that's kind of thought, I thought that's what we had. We just had developed social mores. Like every group over time is going to develop some social mores. They're a little goofy. And that's all I thought it was, right? But the bonding that it put people in, and then to learn that people actually think that's doctrine, right? And so
It becomes that, yeah.
I thought some of that too, but I would hear things that I had grown out of and realize, well, that's has nothing to do with salvation.
Right.
I would hear 80-year-old elders declare that as doctrine. I was like, wow, that guy still think. I didn't know people thought that. So the social mores that groups developed turned into our doctrine too.
I have a few more questions, but do you want to take a break or do you want to finish up?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to.
Take a break.
I've got to go
Okay.
home and I've got to go pick up my mother-in-law. So.
Okay.